when I realized my family had boarded a plane to Florida without me. I was 13 years old and standing barefoot on the cold kitchen tile, holding a note that smelled faintly of my mother's perfume. It took me a moment to understand what I was reading. My eyes skimmed the words again and again, as if they might rearrange themselves into something kinder if I stared long enough. "We'll be back in a week. There's food in the fridge. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just instructions, written in my mother's tight, slanted handwriting, the kind she used when she was irritated or in a hurry. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you can hear your own breathing and the slow tick of the clock above the stove. I remember the smell first. Burnt toast. I must have left it too long while I was upstairs getting dressed, still half asleep, still believing it was a normal morning. The toaster popped again, uselessly, like it was trying to remind me of something small and ordinary, as if this was just another day. I called out for my sisters. Bianca first, then Chloe. Their rooms were empty, beds stripped, closets half cleared. Bianca's lavender suitcase, her favorite, the one with the broken zipper, was gone. Chloe's stuffed rabbit, the one she still pretended not to care about, was missing from her pillow. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped something essential out of me and forgotten to put it back. I didn't cry right away. That came later. At first I just stood there holding the note, listening to the refrigerator hum, and the clock tick and the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower starting up. The world hadn't stopped. It hadn't even slowed down. It had simply moved on without me. That was the moment my childhood ended. Not with a fight or a scream, but with a quiet absence that settled into my bones. Before that day, my life had been unremarkable in the way many unhappy homes are. From the outside, we looked fine. A modest house in a decent neighborhood. 2 parents, 3 daughters, holiday photos framed on the wall, my father and his pressed button. Down, my mother smiling just enough to look pleasant, Bianca and Chloe leaning into each other like twins even though they were 2 years apart. I was the odd one out, always had been. Bianca was beautiful in an obvious way. Blonde hair that caught the light, a laugh that drew people in. Chloe was clever and sharp-tongued, already practicing the art of being admired. And then there was me, Alara, quiet, observant. The child who learned early how to disappear into the corners of rooms. My parents didn't hit me. They didn't scream. Not often. They simply overlooked me. Birthdays were forgotten or rushed. Report cards were glanced at and set aside. If Bianca or Chloe needed something, the house moved to accommodate them. If I needed something, I learned to need it quietly. Meals were eaten with the television on. My mother served food without sitting down. My father talked about work, about promotions he never quite got. When I tried to join the conversation, it was like speaking into a room with the windows open, my words drifting out before anyone. Still, I believed, in that soft, stubborn way children do, that I belonged there, that this was family, that love, even thin and inconsistent, was better than nothing. So when I woke up that morning to an empty house, my first thought wasn't they abandoned me. It was, there must be a mistake. I waited. All day. By evening, hunger gnawed at my stomach. I ate cold leftovers standing at the counter, the chair scraped back but never used. I slept curled up on the couch, the television murmuring to itself, every sound outside making my heart jump. The next day passed, and then another. I didn't go to school. I told myself my parents would be furious if I did, that they'd say I embarrassed them. The truth was simpler and sadder. I didn't know what to say if anyone asked where they were. On the 3rd day, I ran out of milk. On the 4th, the house began to feel too big, too echoing. I started sleeping with the lights on. I stopped opening the curtains. It was on the 5th day that someone knocked on the door. I remember hesitating. Fear and hope tangled together in my chest so tightly it hurt to breathe. I opened the door just a crack. He stood there holding a paper bag, his hair streaked with gray even then, his eyes warm and uncertain. He looked at me like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to. "Alara," he asked gently. "It's me, Silas." I knew his name before I remembered his face. Silas Thorne, my mother's younger brother. The one she never talked about. The one who didn't come to holidays. The one who, according to her, thought he was better than us. I stared at him, my fingers white around the doorframe. They're gone, I said, because it felt important that he know they went to Florida. His mouth tightened, just slightly. He nodded, like he'd already guessed as much. I know, he said. May I come in? Something in his voice, steady, careful, made room inside me for the first time in days. I opened the door wider. That choice would change the rest of my life. Silas stepped into the house like he was entering a place that might break if he moved too fast. He set the paper bag down on the kitchen counter, his eyes taking in the clutter I hadn't noticed anymore. The unwashed dishes, the crumbs on the floor, the open refrigerator humming like it was tired. He didn't comment on any of it. He just rolled up the sleeves of his jacket and began unloading groceries as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Have you eaten today? He asked, not looking at me. I shook my head. The truth felt embarrassing, even though I wasn't sure why. He nodded once. All right, we'll fix that. The word "we" landed strangely in my chest. It felt foreign, heavy. He moved with a quiet confidence, cracking eggs into a pan, tearing bread with his hands instead of cutting it. The smell of butter filled the kitchen, warm and grounding. I sat at the table, my feet tucked under me, watching him the way you watch someone who knows something you don't. While he cooked, he talked. Not about my parents. Not about Florida. He told me about the drive over, about a ridiculous billboard he'd passed advertising alligator wrestling, about the rain that had started and stopped twice before he reached our street. It was only after I had eaten, only after my stomach stopped aching, that he finally sat across from me. Alara, he said, folding his hands together. Do you feel safe here? I hesitated. The honest answer floated up before I could stop it. No. He nodded again. That's what I thought. He didn't ask me to defend my parents. He didn't tell me I'd misunderstood. He didn't say families sometimes make mistakes. He cames. Instead, he took a slow breath, like someone choosing his words carefully. You can stay with me, he said. As long as you need, we'll figure the rest out later. Something inside me cracked open then, not loudly, not dramatically. Tears slid down my face before I even realized I was crying. I wiped at them with the heel of my hand, mortified. I don't want to be a problem, I whispered. Silas leaned forward. His voice was steady, but his eyes softened. You're not a problem, he said. You're a child. Those words, simple, obvious, felt like permission. Permission to be small, permission to need something, permission to stop pretending I could survive alone. That night I slept in the guest room at Silas's house, wrapped in clean sheets that smelled like laundry soap and cedar. The room was quiet, but not the oppressive quiet of my parents' house. This quiet felt, held, safe. The next morning he made pancakes. Real ones, not from a box. He flipped them with an ease that suggested practice. You like blueberries? He asked. I nodded. I wasn't sure how he knew. He smiled. Good. Over the next few days, he handled everything with a calm efficiency that amazed me. He contacted the school. He spoke to a lawyer. He left messages for my parents that went unanswered. When they finally did call back, angry, indignant, he took the call in another room. I could hear his voice through the wall, low, controlled. You don't leave a 13-year-old alone for a week, he said. I don't care if you think she's mature. That's neglect. There was a pause. Then, no, she's staying with me. Another pause. Longer this time. I'll see you in court if I have to. When he hung up, he didn't come out right away. When he did, his expression was composed, but something tired flickered behind his eyes. They're not happy, he said simply. I waited for him to tell me to pack my things, to explain that this was temporary, that I'd be going back. He didn't. The legal process was slow and quiet. There were meetings I didn't attend, documents I didn't read. I knew only that my parents didn't fight very hard, that Bianca and Chloe didn't call. That, somehow, the world rearranged itself so that I lived with my uncle. Silas never tried to replace my father. He didn't demand affection or obedience. He didn't insist I call him anything but his name. What he did do was show up. He showed up to parent-teacher conferences, to school plays, to awkward middle school award ceremonies where my name was called for things like most improved and quiet leadership. He taught me how to change a tire, how to balance a checkbook, how to sit in silence without feeling like I needed to apologize for existing. "You don't owe the world your smallness," he told me once, when I hesitated before raising my hand in class. "Take up space. It's allowed." His house was filled with books and plants and light. He worked long hours. He ran his own consulting firm, but when he was home, he was present. Dinners were eaten at the table. Phones stayed in pockets. He asked questions and waited for answers. Sometimes late at night, I would hear him pacing. I knew he worried. About money, about the responsibility he'd taken on, about me. But he never said it aloud. The years unfolded quietly. High school, college applications, my first job. Silas was there for all of it, offering advice when I asked, silence when I didn't. We didn't talk about my parents much. When we did, it was factual, neutral. "They send cards sometimes," he told me once, "if you want them." I shook my head. No, he accepted that without comment. By the time I was 28, I had built a life I was proud of, a career, friends, a sense of self that felt solid and earned. And then, one autumn morning, Silas collapsed in the kitchen. The smell of coffee filled the air. The mug shattered on the floor. I remember his face more than anything, surprised, like he hadn't expected his body to fail him. The hospital was all white walls and murmured voices. I held his hand while machines beeped steadily around us. "Hey," he said softly, when he woke for a moment. "You did good, kid." Tears blurred my vision. "You're not allowed to leave," I said. He smiled faintly. "We'll see." He died 3 days later. At the funeral, people I didn't know came up to me with stories about his kindness, his integrity, the way he mentored young professionals, the way he'd mentored me. My parents came too. So did Bianca and Chloe. They hugged me like we were close, like nothing had happened. That was when I knew the quiet was about to end. The first thing Bianca said to me after the funeral wasn't, "I'm sorry for your loss." It was, "So, did he ever mention his will?" We were standing near the coffee urn in the church basement. The room smelled like weak coffee and sugar cookies. Folding chairs scraped against the floor as people milled around, speaking in hushed, respectful tones. Bianca looked exactly as she always had, perfect hair, tasteful black dress, mascara untouched by tears. I stared at her, the question echoing in my ears. "No," I said slowly. "He didn't." She nodded, as if I'd confirmed something she already believed. "Well, he had a lot. Properties, investments. I'm sure he took care of things properly." I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to. Chloe joined us then, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. She had always been sharper than Bianca, more direct. "You know," she said, lowering her voice, "it would be the right thing for everything to go back to the family." I looked at her. Really looked at her. The same sister who hadn't called me once in 15 years. Who hadn't asked where I'd lived, or how I'd survived, or whether I'd been loved. "He was my family," I said quietly. Chloe's mouth tightened. "You know what I mean." I excused myself and went outside, the cool air hitting my face like a reset. I stood by Silas's favorite maple tree, the one he used to lean against while reading in the afternoons. The leaves were just beginning to turn, orange creeping into the green. I thought grief would be loud, that it would come in waves of sobbing and screaming. Instead, it settled into me like a heavy coat I couldn't take off. Everything felt slower, muted. Over the next few days, my parents called. Then showed up at my door unannounced. They spoke in the careful, rehearsed tones of people trying to sound reasonable. "We've been thinking," my mother said, sitting stiffly on my couch, "about how unfortunate everything was, how things got misunderstood." My father nodded. "We were under a lot of stress back then." I waited. "We'd like to move forward," my mother continued. "As a family." There it was. The word she hadn't used in 15 years. I don't think that's possible, I said. She frowned. Alara, don't be dramatic. Blood is blood. I thought of Silas, sitting at the kitchen table teaching me how to negotiate a salary, of his quiet pride when I bought my first home, of the way he'd looked at me like I mattered. No, I said calmly. Choice is choice. They left angry, offended. My phone buzzed that night with messages from Bianca and Chloe, thinly veiled concern wrapped around pointed questions. When is the will reading? Do you know who the executor is? We should talk. The will reading took place 2 weeks later in a lawyer's office that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old paper. And the walls were lined with books, their spines worn from use. The executor, a woman named Margaret, greeted me warmly. Silas had spoken of her often, trusted her. My parents arrived together. Bianca and Chloe sat on either side of them, like a united front. They smiled at me, tight and expectant. Margaret cleared her throat and began. She listed the usual things first: personal effects, charitable donations, a scholarship fund Silas had quietly established. Then she paused. And to my niece, Alara Vance, she read, I leave my primary residence, my investment properties, my business interests, and the remainder of my estate. The room went silent. My mother's breath hitched. Bianca's smile froze. Chloe's eyes widened. Margaret continued, her voice steady. I make this decision with full clarity and intent. Alara has been my daughter in all the ways that matter. I trust her to honor this gift with wisdom and integrity. My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is absurd, he said. She manipulated him. I felt my heart pound, but my voice came out even. That's not true. Bianca laughed, sharp and brittle. You were a child. You don't understand how these things work. Margaret folded her hands. And Mrs. Vance, the will is clear. Contesting it would require substantial evidence of coercion or incapacity. Neither exists. My mother turned to me, her eyes shining with something between anger and desperation. How could you do this to us? She asked. I met her gaze. I didn't do anything, I said. He did. We left separately. I walked out into the sunlight, my legs trembling, my mind buzzing. I hadn't wanted this kind of confrontation. I hadn't wanted to see their faces twist with greed and disbelief. But there it was, undeniable. That night, alone in Silas's house, I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten my first real meal after being abandoned. I placed my hand on the worn wood. I hope I'm worthy, I whispered. The house was quiet, but for the first time, it didn't feel empty. The days after the will reading felt like standing in the aftermath of a storm. Everything familiar, but shifted just enough to feel uncertain. My parents didn't accept the outcome quietly. They called lawyers. They sent formal letters. They left voicemails that swung wildly between outrage and wounded affection. Bianca tried a different approach, long messages about fairness and family unity. Chloe's were colder, more strategic, hinting at legal angles she clearly didn't fully understand. I listened to them all without responding. Grief has a way of sharpening your sense of what matters. Silas had taught me that, how to separate noise from truth, so I let the noise pass. One afternoon, Margaret invited me back to her office to go over details. As we sat across from each other, she slid a manila folder toward me. There's something you should read, she said. Inside was a letter, sealed but unopened. My name was written on the front in Silas's familiar, careful script. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Alara, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. I don't know how you'll feel, angry, relieved, lost. But whatever it is, let yourself feel it. Don't rush past it. I paused, my throat tight. I know my decision will cause conflict. That's unavoidable. But I made it knowing exactly what I was doing. You were abandoned at an age when you should have been protected. You didn't grow bitter. You grew strong. That didn't happen by accident. Tears blurred the page. This estate isn't a reward. It's a continuation, a vote of confidence. I want you to live freely, without apologizing for your place in the world. You never owed anyone your silence. With love, Silas. I folded the letter carefully and pressed it to my chest. The confrontation came a week later. My parents requested a meeting. Neutral ground, they said. A cafe downtown, all exposed brick and soft jazz. I arrived early, ordered tea, chose a table near the window. They came together. Bianca and Chloe followed, arms crossed. "We need to talk," my father said, sitting down heavily. "I'm listening," I replied. My mother leaned forward. "We deserve a portion of the estate." I took a sip of tea. "Why?" Her eyes flashed. "Because we're his family." "So was I said. Chloe scoffed. "You were a charity case." The words stung, but they didn't break me. I thought of the night Silas stayed up helping me study. The mornings he waited in the car until I was safely inside school. "No," I said. "I was his choice." Bianca softened her voice. "Elada, be reasonable." "You don't need all of it. I don't need any of it," I said. But he wanted me to have it. My father slammed his hand on the table. "You're being selfish." I met his gaze. "You left me." Silence fell. "You left me," I repeated, my voice steady. "At 13. Without telling me. Without checking on me. You don't get to rewrite that now." My mother looked away. "I'm not here to punish you," I continued. "But I'm not here to save you either." They stood up, chairs scraping loudly. Bianca muttered something under her breath. Chloe didn't look at me at all. I watched them leave, my heart pounding, not with fear but with clarity. The legal challenge never materialized. Their lawyers advised against it. Too risky, too little ground. Life settled into a new rhythm. I moved into Silas's house fully, slowly making it my own without erasing him. I kept his chair by the window, his books on the shelves. Sometimes, late at night, I read his letter again. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt anchored. Months later, I received a final message from Bianca. "I hope you're happy," it read. I thought about it before responding. "I am," I typed. "I hope you find peace." I didn't hear from them again. What Silas left me wasn't just money or property. "I hope you're huppin' it, P." It was the certainty that I had been seen, chosen, loved, and that, I realized, was the inheritance that mattered most. In the months that followed, something unexpected happened. The anger I thought would come never really did. Instead, there was a quiet reckoning, one that unfolded in ordinary moments. In the way I reached for my phone to call Silas, and remembered I couldn't. In the way the house settled at night, the familiar creaks reminding me that life keeps breathing even when someone you love is gone. I threw myself into responsibility, partly out of necessity, and partly because stillness felt dangerous. There were meetings with accountants, property managers, lawyers, decisions that carried weight, choices that would ripple outward. At first, I was terrified of getting it wrong. One afternoon, as I sat in Silas's study, surrounded by his notes and ledgers, I caught myself whispering, "I don't know what I'm doing." The room didn't answer, but I could almost hear his voice anyway. "Then learn. That's how you've always done it." So I did. I asked questions, took my time. I didn't rush to sell or restructure. I remembered how Silas approached everything, with patience and intention. When I made mistakes, I corrected them without spiraling into shame. That, too, was something he'd taught me. Friends noticed the change before I did. "You're different," one of them said over dinner. "Calmer," I smiled. "I think I finally believe I belong where I am." Not everyone was supportive. Word traveled faster than I expected. Old acquaintances reached out, curious, suddenly warm. Some asked for advice. Others hinted at investments or partnerships that felt rushed, opportunistic. I learned to say no without explanation. It was harder than it should have been, but each time I did, I felt stronger. One evening, months after the cafe confrontation, I ran into my mother at the grocery store. She looked smaller, older. Her hair, once meticulously styled, was pulled back carelessly. Our carts collided gently at the end of an aisle. "Hey, Lara," she said, startled. "Mom," I replied. We stood there awkwardly, the hum of freezers filling the space between us. "You look well," she said finally. "Thank you." She hesitated. We didn't expect things to turn out this way. I studied her face, searching for something. Regret, maybe, or understanding. And she nodded. We did our best. I didn't argue. I didn't agree. I simply said, I hope you're taking care of yourself. She looked surprised. You too. We parted without another word. As I walked away, I felt lighter, not because something had been resolved, but because I no longer needed resolution from her. That night, I stood in the backyard, looking up at the stars Silas used to point out to me. He'd loved constellations, loved reminding me how small problems looked from far enough away. I'm okay, I said aloud, unsure who I was speaking to. And I was. I began mentoring young women through the scholarship Silas had established. Watching them navigate fear and ambition reminded me of myself at 13, unsure, overlooked, desperate for someone to see potential instead of inconvenience. You don't have to earn your worth, I told them. It's already yours. Each time I said it, I believed it a little more. I didn't forgive my parents in the way people expect. There was no tearful reconciliation. No apology that healed everything. But I released the story I'd been carrying, the one where I was the child left behind. I wasn't left behind. I was found. And in that truth, I built something solid. A life. A legacy. A sense of peace that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. Silas had given me that. And now I intended to live it fully. The public reckoning came quietly, the way most real consequences do. Not with shouting or spectacle, but with doors that stopped opening. It began with a phone call from Margaret. I thought you should know, she said gently. Your parents have been asking around. Trying to tell their side of things, I smiled faintly. I assumed they would. They're not finding much sympathy, she added. People remember who showed up and who didn't. That was the part no one had prepared them for. Silas had been deeply woven into his community, business partners, former mentees, neighbors. People who had watched me grow up in his care, who had seen him attend my graduations, celebrate my milestones, worry over me like a father would. They knew the truth, not because I'd told them, but because they'd lived adjacent to it. At a charity board meeting a month later, I overheard two women speaking in low voices near the window. Did you hear? One whispered. They tried to contest the will. The other shook her head. After what they did to that girl. Unbelievable. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. My parents stopped being invited to events Silas had once anchored. Bianca's carefully curated social circle grew quieter. Chloe's professional ambitions stalled in subtle ways, recommendations that never came, connections that cooled. No one publicly shamed them. No one confronted them directly. They were simply remembered. And accuracy, I learned, can be devastating. One afternoon, I was sorting through old boxes in the attic when I found a photo album I hadn't seen before. The cover was worn, the edges frayed. Inside were pictures of me and Silas, moments I didn't remember being photographed. Who's baking bread, flour smudged on my cheek, sitting on the porch steps, heads bent together over a book. My high school graduation, his hand resting proudly on my shoulder. At the back of the album was a note, tucked carefully into the sleeve. Proof, it read, in his handwriting. In case. I sat on the attic floor and cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming certainty of being loved. The final encounter with my family happened by chance. I was attending a conference out of town, standing in line for coffee, when I heard my name spoken cautiously behind me. Ilera, I turned. Chloe stood there, older than I remembered, her confidence worn thin around the edges. Hi, I said. She shifted her weight. I didn't expect to see you. Neither did I. We stood in silence for a moment. They talk about you, she said finally. A lot. I raised an eyebrow. Do they? She nodded. About how unfair it all was. And what do you think? She hesitated. For the first time in her life, she seemed unsure. I think we didn't see you, she said. Not really. I waited. You were always so quiet, she continued. I thought that meant you didn't mind. I considered her words. It meant I learned early not to expect much. She winced. I don't know how to fix it, she said softly. I met her gaze. Neither do I. That was the most honest thing I could offer. And then, We parted politely, without promises, without bitterness, and that was enough. Back home, life settled into something gentle and intentional. I expanded the scholarship, invested in local projects Silas had once supported, opened the house for gatherings filled with laughter and warmth. Darren. People began referring to me not as Silas's niece, but simply as Alara. The weight of my past loosened its grip. I realized one morning, while watering the plants Silas loved, that I no longer felt defined by what had been done to me. I was defined by what I chose next. And what I chose was peace. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments, in mornings where I woke without the familiar heaviness in my chest, in evenings where the quiet felt companionable instead of lonely, in the way my body slowly stopped bracing itself for disappointment that never came. I had spent so many years surviving, first as the child who learned not to ask, then as the young woman determined to prove she was worthy of staying, that I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding myself together. Silas had seen it, of course. He used to say, "You don't always have to be strong. Strong people rest too." I didn't understand what he meant until after he was gone. I took my first real vacation at 32. Nothing extravagant. A small coastal town, a rented cottage with creaky floors and windows that rattled in the wind. I brought books I didn't need to finish, walked along the shore without checking my phone, let the salt air tangle my hair. One afternoon, sitting on the sand with my shoes beside me, I felt something shift. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about who might leave, or who might come back wanting something. I wasn't rehearsing conversations in my head or preparing defenses. I was simply there. That was when I understood what Silas had truly given. Me not security, not money, but permission. Permission to exist without fear. Permission to trust myself. When I returned home, I made a decision. I converted part of the house into a small foundation office. Nothing flashy. Just a place to administer the scholarship, host workshops, meet with students who reminded me of the girl I once was, quiet, capable, unseen. On the first day, I unlocked the door and stood in the empty room, sunlight streaming across the floor. "This is for you," I said softly, "and for me." The first young woman I mentored was named Leela. She sat across from me, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes darting around the room like she wasn't sure she belonged there. "They say I'm too reserved," she told me, "that I should be more visible." I smiled gently. "You don't need to change your nature to take up space." Her shoulders relaxed, just a little. In helping them, I healed parts of myself I hadn't known were still tender. My parents faded into the background of my life, not with drama, but with distance. Holiday cards stopped. Updates came secondhand, if at all. Bianca moved away. Chloe changed jobs. They became people I used to know, and that was okay. One evening, years later, I hosted a dinner at the house. The table was full. Friends, colleagues, former scholarship recipients. Laughter bounced off the wall. The smell of roasted vegetables and fresh bread filled the room. I caught myself watching them from the doorway, my chest tight with something like awe. This was family. Chosen, built, sustained with care. I raised my glass. "To Silas," I said simply. There was a murmur of agreement. Glasses clicked. Later, after everyone had gone, I sat alone at the table. The candles had burned low. Wax pooled unevenly on the surface. I thought about the girl I had been at 13, barefoot on cold tile, holding a note that told her not to make things harder than they needed to be. I wished I could reach back through time and tell her the truth, that she wasn't unwanted, she was unrecognized, that being left behind didn't mean she was unlovable, it meant the wrong people failed her. That one day she would stand in a warm house filled with voices and know, without question, that she belonged. Silas used to say legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you leave inside people. His legacy lived in me, in my steadiness, in my refusal to shrink, in my quiet certainty that love, when real, doesn't disappear at the first inconvenience. I turned off the lights and went upstairs, the house settling around me like a deep breath. I slept peacefully. There are moments in life when the truth arrives so quietly, you almost miss it. Mine came years after the abandonment, years after the inheritance, years after the anger. I thought I would carry forever, simply faded. The truth was this: I had spent too long measuring my. But love was never about proximity. It was about presence. Silas didn't share my last name for most of my life. He didn't give me life, but he gave me belonging. He saw me when it was inconvenient. He chose me when no one else did. And in doing so, he taught me the most important lesson I've ever learned. Family isn't who claims you when it benefits them. Family is who stands with you when it costs them something. I didn't walk away from my birth family with revenge in my heart. I walked away with peace. With a life built on intention instead of survival. With the unshakable knowledge that I am enough. Not because someone left me something, but because someone once stayed. If you've ever been overlooked, if you've ever been left behind, if you've ever wondered whether your quiet strength counts, I hope my story reminds you that your value was never up for debate. Sometimes the family that saves you isn't the one you're born into. It's the one that finds you and chooses you back. So tell me, would you have held your ground the way I did? Or would you have tried to earn love from people who already showed you who they were? If this story resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe, like I do, that quiet strength deserves a voice, I hope you'll stay, because there are more stories like this waiting to be told. Thank you for listening.